It's so nice to see my audience, I tell you. I sit alone in a darkened radio studio every morning, and finally I get to see my audience. So it's great that you're all here. Thank you so much. I'm going to zip through this right away and get this conflict of interest slide out of my hair. I have to be honest with you, when I first did an academic conference, I thought, what is this about a conflict of interest slide? I thought, well, I'm a journalist. I don't need a conflict of interest slide. I have no conflicts of interest. However, it's a great idea, actually. I mean, transparency is great. I want that in my work, and I'm glad to put this up here for you. And we should use this in broadcasting, I think, when I do interviews with politicians on television. Just throw it right up there. Those are these conflicts. Go right after it. So there you go. I am a broadcaster. I work at Minnesota Public Radio News and Twin Cities Public Television, so I make my living talking and asking questions. And we don't have similar backgrounds in this room. I wish I had your backgrounds. I love what you do in your work. I really do. We don't have many similar backgrounds here, but we do have one thing in common, and we are all heading to the same place, are we not? And I would venture to guess that there are probably even maybe one or two people in this room who know that on a visceral level. They know they're going there, but they just probably don't really want to consider that option, and I totally understand that. Most of America, of course, doesn't want to talk about death or dying. And prior to my introduction to advanced care directives and planning and hospice and palliative care and the death positive movement, I was one of those individuals because I didn't really want to think about it, I hoped I was going to get to 100 and then drop over and leave a good looking corpse, and that would be the end of that story. And of course, you all know that's not the case. That's not going to be the case. And it's because I had the opportunity to walk with an individual who was indeed dying. And the dying, as you all know, can teach us about living. And so I am here tonight because of a promise I made to a dying man. I promised him that I would find the ripples in our work together. And it was an amazing journey. The gentleman's name was Bruce Kramer. And Bruce was the former Dean of Education at the College University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota. He was a fascinating man. He truly was. He was a world-class musician. He traveled the world, very smart man, and really taught me what it was like to live as fully as possible even while dying and living with ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. What made Bruce's story so intriguing to me as a journalist was how he lived while dying and how he made peace with his fate. Bruce was really pretty Buddhist in his outlook. Now, he was a Methodist, but kind of a Buddhist Methodist, which is kind of weird. But he made peace with his fate, and he would talk a lot about learning how to be human with a disease like ALS and how rich his life became with this disease. Now, I know that sounds odd, and I remember asking him toward the end of his life, look, if someone could wave a magic wand and take the ALS away, would you go back to the way your life was? And he said, no, I would not. And I thought he was kidding, but he wasn't, because he said, I have learned so much about being human. And my life has just expanded. Now, my body, he said, is completely deteriorated. He couldn't move a muscle by the time he passed away. But his spirit was so expansive, he said, I wouldn't go back. And being with Bruce Kramer, I'm telling you, he taught a master class in living. And we met because a colleague in the Minnesota Public Radio newsroom knew about Bruce's blogging, the Dis-Ease Diary. He was very precise about that, the Dis-Ease Diary. And this colleague said, you really should talk to this guy. He's blogging beautifully about his experiences with this terminal illness. And I really didn't want to hear this, not at all, because I thought, where was the news in this guy who's dying? Now, I know this sounds awful that I would say that, but this colleague kept coming at me and saying, you got to read this, you got to talk to me. He should be on the air because I think he could be an interesting interview. And I kept pushing him off and pushing him off. He was like a gnat. And finally I thought, fine. I'm going to do a one and done. A one and done in my business is you're in, you're out, and I forget about you. Now don't let that out, it's a one and done. That's what we call it in the business of broadcasting. So I said, fine, we'll get the guy in here, we'll talk, I'll move on. Because I don't really see any news in talking to a dying man. And Bruce Kramer came in my radio studio, and after 2 hours, I knew something was here because he was amazing. Amazing. And thus began our relationship. And we talked and kept talking after that first 2-hour interview until the day he died in March of 2015. And we became good friends. And because we became friends, I kind of committed journalistic treason because you're not supposed to get close to your subjects. But he and I talked on the radio all that time. We had great conversations. And the thing was, we didn't dwell on the ALS. He hated that. He didn't want to give ALS its due, really. He didn't want to get into the symptomology of that. Instead, we talked about the choices that one makes and the possibilities that remain for living even with a terminal diagnosis. That's what we talked about. We talked about what it's like to live with death sitting right next to you all the time. And listeners loved it. They loved it. And all of that work on the radio led to a book and then led to something called the Convenings. The Convenings. We kind of call this a community engagement program designed to creatively encourage people to explore what it means to thrive with a serious illness, a disability, or even thriving into your impending death. And we focus on the choices that you can make throughout your life, and certainly the choices to make in end-of-life planning. Now, when we founded the Convenings after Bruce's death, some people didn't quite get it. Said the Convenings. You're convening what exactly? I did an interview in Little Laverne, Minnesota, which is in far western Minnesota. It was with a small radio station, and the DJ said, now, tell me about these covenings you're doing. I'm thinking, well, no, it's not about witchcraft or devil worship, so I thought we probably should change the name of our organization, and earlier this summer we did, and it's now we are called End in Mind, which is pretty precise as to what we're all about, End in Mind. We're now a Minnesota nonprofit as well. And when we began this journey, we partnered up with Honoring Choices Minnesota. Bless Karen and her staff for putting up with the birth pains of this whole effort that we launched, because we were thinking, well, what exactly is this? So Honoring Choices, as you all know, does great work not only in the state of Minnesota, but elsewhere across the country. And they kind of bake the cake and I frost it. That's kind of what we do if you want to go ahead and kind of look at the process that we have here. So we partner with Honoring Choices Minnesota and other organizations within communities, and we kind of set off. Because Bruce Kramer, he and I started this with a story. We use storytelling in End in Mind to build an authentic connection between individuals, and within a community. So I'm a storyteller. And stories, as you know, can inspire, they can persuade, and we use storytelling in our live shows along with music and readings and interviews with experts. And then we have the audience ponder certain questions, talk amongst themselves, and then kind of reflect back to me. It's kind of this really fun, I know that sounds strange to say fun, but it can be a fun event and entertaining. And what is fun for me as a journalist is it's not political. Thank the Lord. It is not political. No one knows the politics of the person sitting on either side of them in a theater. They don't know who you voted for. They don't care. We're talking about what really matters in life. And for me, as a journalist up there in front on stage, it is just a relief, because it is fun to feel that energy as people are actually starting to think about what really matters in all of our lives. So we ask questions, pretty simple, not simple, but pretty deep. I mean, how do you want to live your life right now? And how do you want your death to go? And I can tell you, there are always interesting stories behind the answers to those questions. That's where the storytelling comes in. So end in mind, in our public events, we want to spark thoughtful and meaningful conversations about these questions and others. Now, let's face it, we all know that, and most people buy into having an advanced care directive. I think most people would say that's a good idea, but it's like going to the dentist. I mean, let's face it. Come on, really, you got to admit this. People think it's a good idea, but they often don't do it until you really need to go to the dentist. And so, End in Mind motivates people to access ACP concepts and materials during our live events. That's what we do. We make it less scary and less anxiety-producing, and we instill some urgency to do this, but we try to make it more, not palatable, but a little more inviting to start the conversation. That's what we do. And beyond that, we encourage people to live, as Bruce did, with intention and meaning, no matter their situation. So what's the roadmap? How do we do this? Well, we are invited into a community. We have a waiting list of 30 communities in the state of Minnesota right now, and that's not even including the Twin Cities metro area. A number of places want us to come in, churches specifically. So there's a waiting list. We're invited in, and a planning committee is formed in that specific community. That's where Honoring Choices comes in as well. We meet, we plot strategy. I come in with my team and I do a live kickoff event in a theater. It can be in a large venue. It is an actual event, scripted with music and transitions, and as I mentioned, the whole bowl of wax. And then the next 6 months after I leave, the community gets together and has very specific community-oriented events around advanced care planning facilitation training, book clubs, death over dinner, death over drinks, death over dessert, whatever death you want to do, they do that. Art exhibits, it's really cool. I have to say, it's so interesting to see what different communities do. After 6 to 8 months, I come zipping back in, and I do another live event. And it's a celebratory event to just kind of find out, hey, what you've been doing? How's this feel for you? How many people have been trained? What are y'all doing with this? And it has been so interesting to see what people say. Now, we have been successful so far because of fantastic support from Alina, Health Partners, and Centricare, 3 of the largest healthcare organizations in the state of Minnesota. They've been there from the beginning, and they're still with us, which is so, so gratifying. So we have that, and they also are at the table when it comes to kind of fashioning some of the concepts that we've been working on. We also have had great support from the media, and that's where I come in, obviously. We partnered up with Care 11 TV here in the Twin Cities, the NBC affiliate, and that was an easy sell, because Care 11, we used to call them the Care Bears back in the day, they are all about being in a community and wanting to just embed themselves to do good. It's all about ratings. I mean, it does help, to have audience, obviously, but they are very much a community-oriented TV station. So when we pitched them on the idea of being the media sponsor for then the Convenings, now End in Mind, they said, absolutely, what do you want? What do you want? What do you need? And so we decided that they, in their newsroom, would do stories. And they did 5 to 6 stories during the 10 p.m. news during the November sweeps, which is amazing. The 10 p.m. newscast is the most watched newscast in any market. And these folks in their newsroom did stories about what is advanced, what's ACP, how do you have the conversation, how do you live with a serious illness, what's the intergenerational conversations you have around this. They knocked it out of the park. They were fantastic. Now, I also work in TV, and so Twin Cities Public Television jumped into the pool as well and said, all right, what do you want to do? So they focused on cultural communities in Minnesota. And we had great conversations with Somali Americans, Hmong Americans, and the Hispanic population, some members of the Hispanic community in Minnesota. And then we had a half-hour-long broadcast on TPT. I should also mention that our friends at Care 11 had an hour-long broadcast, 1 full hour, about advanced care directives. Where have you heard about that on a commercial TV station? You have not, at least in a market like Minneapolis, St. Paul. So that was pretty cool, to say the least. We have been in we've done a dozen live events across the state of Minnesota since we began in Little Ely, Minnesota in November of 2016. Oh, rats, my friends in Duluth, I'm sorry. We are in Duluth as well. I don't know why that didn't pop up, but you can see that we've been around in the state of Minnesota doing our live events and being in communities. Success is seen in communities we've discovered with a broad cross-section of the community on the planning committee. And this is interesting. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about St. Cloud, Minnesota. Do I have my friends from St. Cloud in the room? Yes. All right. They were so much fun to work with. Middle of the state of Minnesota, obviously. CentraCare was our main funder there. And St. Cloud was very interesting. It's an interesting community because it's a college town, or at least it has St. Cloud State University and 2 other major universities close by. Both are Catholic schools, St. John's and St. Ben's. St. Cloud is a growing community. It's also becoming more diverse. And so we landed in St. Cloud, and we partnered up with the local advanced care planning group called Light the Legacy. And I know that Lynn is going to talk a little bit more about Light the Legacy later on in the week here at this gathering. But they did a very cool stage presentation, it's a stage play called An Almost Murder Mystery. I'm not gonna steal her thunder. I'm going to tell you it's pretty cool. So we had a truncated version on stage in one of our live stage shows, and the audience loved it because it sparks communication and conversation right away. Also in St. Cloud, one of our partner organizations, the Bruce Kramer Collaborative, gave Light the Legacy a grant, and they used that grant to have a couple of community events. This happens to be a legacy letter writing workshop that was held earlier this fall. And it was also really well attended, where folks learned how to write a legacy letter, how to put into words what they want people to remember about them when they're gone. And it was a really wonderful event. And then, of course, we had the 2 live events. Both were really well attended. That picture is at St. John's University. I stepped out on stage. 500 people were staring back at me. What is that about, people? 500 individuals. And I thought, at that moment in time, gosh, there must be something here. What is it? And it was a really great event. And our partnership in St. Cloud was really fruitful. Another great place was Northfield, Minnesota. Again, kind of a college town. 2 major universities there, 2 colleges, Carleton and St. Olaf. Just to the south of the Twin Cities metro area, Northfield is also a really active community, also becoming more racially diverse. And they have a fantastic and really robust arts community. And we do tap into the arts community in End of Mind. We figure we see artists as looking at what we are all talking about through a much different lens. So we were in Northfield, and the poet laureate in Northfield, Minnesota joined us. He was a really cool guy. He wrote his living will in poetry form. I couldn't believe it until I actually read it and got to listen to him. He was great. It was so good. He opened it up to the entire community and said, hey, you want to give this a shot? And almost 75 people did. And it's terrific. And it's so good, we're going to go ahead and make a little book out of Northfield, Minnesota's living wills in poetry form. Who knew? Pretty cool, right? We also had a very robust social media initiative in Northfield. And this was the first time we kind of messed around with this. We had a hashtag WGYLM. What gives your life meaning? I know, right? And we had a couple college students run around Northfield with chalk and put that hashtag on sidewalks. City leaders, not impressed. I thought it was cool, but they were not impressed. However, sorry about that. So we had that hashtag going, and when people got to the first event, we gave them little Post-it notes and wanted them to answer the question, what gives your life meaning? And they did that, and so they slapped it up there with their Post-it notes, and it was so kind of cool because it could be anything. What gives your life meaning? My dog. Ice cream. I mean, whatever it was for anybody, they slapped it up there, and there was that board was covered with little Post-it notes. It was almost like a mosaic. It was pretty cool. It was framed, and it's now at the Northfield Hospital. Again, both events, the kickoff and the celebratory event, were very, very well attended. And the energy in the room, both times, was fantastic. We're going to be in Duluth, Minnesota. Speaking of things that we're doing, we're going to be doing a television program in Duluth, Minnesota in November at WDSE, which is the public television station. Obviously, I'm comfortable doing TV, so we're going to be doing a show there to kind of kick off an effort. We're also working in Shakopee, Minnesota, which is to kind of the south of the Twin Cities metro area. That is a very interesting community because we are working with the Shakopee and Mdewakanton Sioux community. It's another community where it's also quite racially diverse. And that community is on fire when it comes to this whole subject matter. And the planning committee is amazing. They have brought together the faith community, the school district, the police and fire department, the YMCA, the historical society, the library. I mean, this amazing, diverse bunch of people at the table, and they are helping us out. And that committee has all kinds of amazing events scheduled. So my show, the show that we're doing, is next Tuesday at Mystic Lake Casino. So I figure if it bombs, we'll just go to the craps tables and roll dice is what we're going to do, which is really that's what life is anyway, isn't it? Just a roll of the dice. So we're going to be at a casino, which should be interesting next Tuesday. If you're in the area, do stop in and see how we do. So we've been working hard in different communities. And so you might want to, I bet you're probably asking yourself, fantastic, Cathy, sounds great. I hope you're having a good time doing these shows. What about the results? We do give surveys both at the beginning and at the end. To give you an example, 30% of those individuals who showed up to one of our first events, on average, 30%, not a clue about advanced care directives, don't want to talk about death and dying, la, 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 la. The last event, we resampled, 90% had actually considered the end of their lives and whether they might want to kind of look at that advanced care directive thing and are on the way to filling out their advanced care directive. So, is that hard science? No, but it is kind of interesting. I mean, at least the needle is moving a little bit when it comes to folks and how they feel and what they're thinking about. Part of what we talk about a lot at the live events, of course, is what gives your life meaning, what matters in your life. And I remember asking Bruce that question, too, before he passed away. It was the last conversation we ever had on the air, and I asked that question of him. What gives your life meaning? And this is what he had to say.
As I approach the last months of my life, what really has the deepest meaning of all is the love that I share with my family, my friends, my granddaughter. These are things that, in many ways, without them, my life would be meaningless. So I think if I were to be able to wave a magic wand, I wouldn't ask people to do things the way I'm doing them. But what I would do is ask people to examine their own lives and ask themselves the question you asked me: what really gives you a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose? And I think most of us, when we are honest and truthful about that, we would turn to things that impending death really focuses. I can't stress enough, this feels like loss, and it feels like sorrow, and it is, but it's also great joy. In a lot of ways, it's like fireworks. You know, you shoot the rocket into the air and you anticipate, and then boom, it's this beautiful sparkle, and then it's gone. And I think that's what focusing on your death and how it focuses your life, it's a lot like that.
It's this beautiful sparkle and then it's gone. Yeah, that's life. I hope every day I think of Bruce, and I'm hoping what I'm doing with End in Mind is the ripple he asked me to find. I hope it is. I really do. I know for a fact he would love, love, love the collaboration that we have with our communities and just that feeling of connection in communities, because he was all about that, all about connection and all about community. And you throw collaboration in there, he would just be doing cartwheels if he were with us today, I think. So I want to thank you. I want to thank you all for what you do. Thank you for your work in helping normalize conversations about death and dying. I want to thank you for helping people die with a sense of well-being. And I want to thank you for empowering people to make choices in their health care that reflect their values and their goals, especially at the end of life. I'm gonna leave you this cute cartoon because I love Charlie Brown, and Charlie Brown is right. He absolutely is right. And this work that you all are doing, and I guess I'm doing, it's about death, kind of, and yes, I mean, you know, the end and advanced care directives and planning and that kind of thing, but Snoopy's right too. Because it is about living, and you all know that, right? It is totally about the living. So, you know, this is what happens. It's always about the technology. There we go. All right, we're gonna do it one more time because I thought that was cute. There you go. There you go. All right. So in keeping with our new name, I hope you're gonna ponder how you might live your own life if you kept the end in mind. It's a good question to ask yourself every now and again. Thank you so much.